I'd like to talk a little bit about the magic of soapstone. Soapstone is friendly, easy to carve, soft, holds heat, friendly to fire, has been used for thousands of years by people from the Arctic and wherever soapstone occurs. The Eskimos use it in their igloos to hold the fire. Africans carve soapstone. Native people in Maine used soapstone, and throughout New England there was a soapstone bowl industry where I believe it was men would go to soapstone outcrops and peck away at the outcrop to make a round shape, perhaps a little bit smaller than a soccer ball, and then they would bring that released ball back to the camp, to the village, and continue to peck away at it and make bowls which could be put in fire and wouldn't last forever, but they would last a lot longer than pottery. I became interested in soapstone many years ago, in particular after I was looking at this book, Indian Antiquities of the Kennebec Valley by Charles Willoughby. It's a reproduction of his colored journal done many years ago. He had published a book about the antiquities of New England with almost no illustrations. And then he, one of the first archaeologists of the region, decided he would conduct digs, exploratory digs up and down the Kennebec. And as I was going through this remarkable book, I came across a page which deeply moved me. And on this page was a soapstone pipe that he had found in the Kennebec River Valley. And I said to myself, if there's a soapstone pipe found here, of course it could have been traded from further away, then there must be soapstone someplace here in Maine. And so I began an earnest search for the stone. Couldn't find anything anywhere, and eventually I discovered two little booklets published by the state of Maine referring to the mineral deposits in Maine. And near the back, all alphabetical, was something called steatite, and it referred to the steatite deposits throughout Maine. And one in particular interested me. It turns out that there were many deposits along the coast of Maine, Thomaston, Rockland, etc., where surface deposits had been found by whoever was living there and would be turned into griddles and soapstone bed warmers and perhaps bowls, prehistorically, before European people came. Native people knew where the soapstone was and found it and used it not only for pipes, but for utilitarian purposes. And so one of the places that was indicated in this little book was an island off of one leg of the Harpswell Peninsula called Jaquish Island. And so I was determined to figure out a way to get there somehow. And at that point, I had already initiated a relationship with the world's largest producer of soapstone masonry heaters in Finland, and had worked for 5 years to bring them to the United States and Canada, and succeeded in that. And so I was building a pair of soapstone tulikivi, firestone, Finnish tulikivi stoves for a lovely family in They were living at that point in Brunswick, Maine, near Freeport, right on the edge of the water. And it was a young family, so there were little ones, including a babe in arms. And I think, started on the corner fireplace. I think it was called the 1650, with some rough stone on it, like this rough stone on our little Tulakivi heater. And I was assured by the family that I would get an assistant. In the meantime, I was being helped by the young mother, Lynn, who was also caring for one or two children at that point. And I can remember I was on the second unit, which was a soapstone cook stove combination with a masonry oven, also made out of soapstone. And I was on a little step staging of wood that I carried with me and put together and took apart for each project. And Lynn said that my helper had arrived. And this young woman came through the door, and I almost lost my balance because I sensed a lightness around her head, kind of like a halo or an aura. It was a definite, lovely, light energy. And I realized that it would be easy to get along with this person. She had a beautiful spirit. And her name was Dawn. And we got to working together, and I said, "Where do you live?" And she said, I live on the Harpswell Peninsula. And I said, "Wow," because that's where the island was, off the tip of one leg of the Harpswell Peninsula. And I said, she had been driving a little pickup truck. I said, "Do you have a canoe?" And she said, "Well, yes, I do." And I said, "I think you might be the person that's supposed to take me to Jakewish Island." And she got quite excited about the idea. And the next day, she showed up promptly at 8 a.m. and we worked hard all day long. She had a canoe tied to the racks on her truck. And at the end of the workday, around 5 o'clock, we raced, jumped in her truck and raced down from where we were working, the 20 minutes or half an hour, to Land's End and the tip of that leg of the Harpswell Peninsula. And we took the canoe off the top of her truck and loaded the paddles and walked it down to the rocky beach, and there was the island, a quarter of a mile out, not far at all, easy to see, easy to get to, a calm day. But it was late in the day and the sun was close to going down. So we paddled rapidly out to the backside of the island where there was a little cove, and we pulled the canoe up into the cove and on shore. And then with great enthusiasm, I started walking as fast as possible out to the head of the island. And it's a very modest island, hundreds of yards long. And got to what I would call the headland, which was a cliff maybe 20 feet above the water. And then I looked down to the east towards where the sun was rising, and the sun was setting, starting to set behind us. And there, 200 or 300 yards down, I could see a plume of light emerging from the beach. And I turned to Dawn and I said, "That has to be it." I had this sense that that's where the soapstone was, where the plume of light, this magical plume of light going 20, 30 feet in the air was expressing itself. And we then ran across this very rough, rocky beach, across boulders, until we got to that spot where the plume of light was. And when we got there, we didn't need the light anymore, because there in front of us, 12, 15, maybe 20 feet wide, was this astounding gray, polished blanket of rippled, ocean-carved soapstone seam emerging from the ocean and climbing up onto the edge of the island. And I was thrilled because I'd been looking for soapstone in Maine for years, and I realized we had we had found it. And in each heavy storm, some pieces of the soapstone would be calved and they would be freed from the bed of soapstone and they'd be tossed up high on the beach. And if you walked up high on that beach, which was just rock, you could find pieces of soapstone this size and this size and this size. And so we didn't have tools, we didn't want to take anything. The island at this point was uninhabited, and there were lots of pieces of soapstone. And one of the pieces that I found remarkably came into my hands, and I'll pick this up. And it was shaped strangely like a dragon. And remember that Tulikivi means firestone, and soapstone has always been used because it's friendly to fire. It can hold fire in a pipe, in a bowl. It can handle the heat of a cook stove and transfer the heat to a bed warmer with a wire bale handle. And here I had a stone that was 95% complete as a little sculpture in the shape of a dragon. And I knew right away what I wanted to use it for. Here it had kind of the ripples of a tail. I may have enhanced these a tiny bit with a file, but these ripples were here. This hole was here. These holes were here. And this hole was here. And I enlarged it slightly. And here was the head of the dragon. And I enhanced it a little bit and carved a mouth and an eye. But it was basically a dragon. And it had come as a gift from a lot of hard work of searching for soapstone in Maine. And I knew what I wanted to use it for. I wanted to use it to make fire. And to make fire, you need something to hold. And this is with a bow drill. So imagine this as a stone that I hold in my hand. Here's a notch from my thumb. This hole can receive a spindle. Here's a spindle. And around the spindle, I have a bow. This is a piece of oak from a dead branch on a tree on my land where I was looking for a bow shape. So this branch grew off the tree here and I cut it with a saw. See the bow in it, which leaves room for a gap. And then another little branch at the top where I could tie this piece of nylon. Then I can twist my spindle into my string with one turn. You probably hope that I'm going to make fire here, and I'm not. I'm going to tell you this story. And then at a later date, hopefully we'll be able to do a video outdoors. So here, the dragon stone, excuse me, sits on the spindle, and below the dragon stone is a fireboard. So if I'm on my knees and I have the stone held properly, braced against my ankle, I can turn this bow back and forth. Remember in another video, I talked about Ray saying how grandfather had told him that spruce carries the spark. And so the classic best choice of a spindle was a piece of spruce. I don't think that this particular spindle is spruce, and it's quite short, but it's been effective. And you can see on the fireboard that what you do is you carve a little notch in the edge of the board, and then you rotate the spindle back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. And eventually the friction causes some of the spindle, spruce is carrying the spark, some of that to get quite black and quite hot. And it's also wearing a hole in the board, which might be cedar, it might be spruce. And together, they create a little fine coal. You know when you have a coal when you've created copious amounts of smoke over a period of several minutes of hard labor. And when you do that, then you set your bow down, and you very carefully take your board, which is on the ground, and you can take something to receive it, and you're going to drop your coal with the edge of your knife into a little pile of tinder, something that'll hold a coal. So we've created a coal, we have maybe 30 seconds or so, and we just tease that little coal into the tinder. We put the board down, there's no rush. This particular tinder you can see has some milkweed in it, some fine shavings of the inner bark of cedar, and perhaps a few other items. As I said in another video, a mouse nest is a good choice. And then one wraps the tinder around the little tiny coal, and you start to blow on it. And as the smoke begins to come up and build, you keep wrapping the tinder around, and as you keep blowing, finally, it leaps into flame. And then you deliver that handful of flame. You are now holding fire. You deliver that handful of flame to the kindling that you've set up in the campfire that you want to build a fire in. And that process is repeated every time you want to make a fire with a bow drill. But here I had the end of a long search. I had soapstone, but I had a dragon telling me that soapstone and fire were connected. And it's very common for this not to be a stone. It's more common for it to be a flat of wood or a round of wood with a cup hole in the bottom of it, something that you can hold easily in your hand. But everything about this was already made, and it was the gift of the beach. I've thought about this for years and years and years, and it was only today that I realized that this woman who had this light around her, who had the canoe, who took me to the island where together we saw the plume of light coming from the blanket of soapstone coming out of the ocean, that her name, Dawn, means light. I had never put that together before. I see her from time to time, and we've remained distant friends. We might see each other once a year at the Common Ground Fair. But I've never forgotten that wonderful role she played in my journey with soapstone. Let's look forward to a time where we can take this outside and show you how to make fire. A friend of mine from Long Island called Teepee Ted came to Maine frequently in the old days, and I can remember him taking us into the back L and teaching me and my partner Cheryl at that time, and my two children, teaching us all how to make fire and to find the implements to do so. And he's taught hundreds or thousands of children how to make fire using a bow drill. The bow drill can take this form. It can also take the form of a spindle, just a spindle on a board. And you see videos today of native people on islands in the South Seas who run their hands down a spindle like this and keep doing that again and again until they've created a coal. So this technique is ancient and shared around the world, was slight variations. There's even one, my favorite, where there's a mouthpiece, like a soccer player or a football player might do, where your mouth clamps on that piece, and in that piece is a hole to receive a spindle. So now you've freed up both hands, and there's a small drill, and one hand is holding the board, and one hand is holding the drill, and the mouth is holding the little mouthpiece that caps the top of the spindle. That's something that I think was used by the people of the Arctic. So people have understood for a very long time that soapstone is friendly to fire, and that it is a way to stay warm and to, in my case, help me make fire. Beyond that, it gets even more interesting and, I suppose, magical, because it turns out that if we think of this as more than just a tool, if we accept the fact that this landed in my hands because of my desire in my head and my heart to find soapstone, and then recognizing an energy in a person who came into my life as somebody who could assist, and then seeing with that person a light that guided us to the soapstone, why not consider the possibility that this is not just a tool for making fire, but that it has an energy of its own. And that energy is something that we can also relate to in a sacred way. We can consider the possibility that there is sacred energy everywhere around us, and if we only recognize it, then we can develop relationship to that energy, whether it be in a dragon stone or in a incredible 150-year-old yellow birch tree or a tobacco plant. So in my own life, I've been gifted, I've get gifted as part of my journey with soapstone with an understanding that stones can be related to in a very deep and personal and healing way. I was building a pair of soapstone heaters for a couple in Vermont, probably 20 or 30 years ago. And they were recent arrivals in Vermont, and they had built a house, and they were from New York City, and they hoped that they could adopt a lifestyle that would work in Vermont. And they said, Albie, you've got to go see this woman down in Norwich. She's really quite remarkable, and she does readings. And I kind of went ho-hum, but they were very insistent. I come from a family of scientists, and even though I've always had an interest in spirit, I'm not easily persuaded in things that are sort of off the main track. But I said, yeah, I'll go see her. And I went up to her little apartment where she was staying. She was in her 60s, I was probably in my 30s. And we sat, and she did a reading just by being present. And it was all very interesting. I remember almost nothing from it, except she said, Albie, this is very interesting. You in a past life, you in a past life talked to rocks. And I'm thinking, well, that's interesting, but how does that relate to me now? And she said, but what's really interesting is that you will talk to rocks again in this life. And that's caught my attention. So I began to pay very close attention to the possibility that I would have friends that were rocks, that somehow there would be a communication, a sacred communication, and that if I kept my eyes open and my awareness open, I would hear, not in loud human voices, but I would be connected somehow to rocks, and that it would be for good. It wouldn't be for power. It would be for some kind of useful purpose. And over the years, that prediction, that seeing on her part, turned out to be true, in the sense that things began to happen for me with rocks, all of which I would call sacred rocks, that began to, quote, speak and to come into my presence. In every case, as that happened, I was often caught off guard, but I was always aware that, just as in the story of Gluskop and the tobacco and relationship with medicine plants, that this was not something that was to be taken lightly, and that in every case one had to have permission from the rock itself, the spirit of the rock, before one did what most people would do, which was to simply grab the rock and take it home and say, "This is mine." When I would hear rocks or find rocks or see rocks that had an energy that spoke to me, I would then sit with that rock quietly and ask the rock, have you been calling to me? And if in my heart and mind I got a sense of a yes, I would then pick the rock up, hold it gently, and ask if it wished to come with me. Did I have permission to take it with me, to use it in a good way? And in many instances that happened. And so I have a modest collection of sacred rocks, which I keep in close to me, and admire them, talk to them from time to time, take them out and array them in a circle around a sacred fire. But mostly I ask them how they can help. Not so much me, but what is their purpose? If they've chosen me to be their carrier, how can they help? And in almost every case, the rocks will tell me in their own, not foreign language, but their own deeply intuitive language. They will tell me how they can help somebody in need. And so in the years that I have befriended several rocks, or to put it a better way, in the years in which several rocks have befriended me, I have come to appreciate that those rock spirits have knowledge and access to a healing capability outside of anything that I can do, or different forms of medicine can do. It becomes one more means to offer assistance when somebody is sick or injured or depressed. I can say, let me see if I have a rock that might be able to help. The person need not be there, but usually I get the sense that it's appropriate to ask. And this is all done with permission of the spirit of the person and the spirit of the rock. And many, many times it's almost like a lava lamp, where you know something is going to bubble up to the surface. And in the moment, I don't really know which rock might be able to help, but I ask, and I sort of close my eyes and survey all of the rocks, and then one or two of them will surface, and I'll say, are you the one who's able to help? And I'll get a yes or a no from that rock. And then I will proceed to, and then I will ask, is there another rock? And usually the answer is no, but occasionally there is a second rock. So then I will take the rock out of a sacred, usually leather bag that I've kept it in, and I will hold it. And the best time for me to work with a rock or to ask for the help of a rock is when I'm sleeping or just before I sleep. And I will hold it in my hands and I will ask for the rock to give help. And beyond that, I don't have specific requests because I'm counting on the rock to do what it can do, not what I can do. And sometimes there is no obvious result, and sometimes there is. And it's good to feel that in some very small way, a gift of a connectedness, a sacred connectedness to rocks can serve others. And when that happens, sometimes a person's issues with depression can be relieved. Sometimes a person's issues with stomach troubles can be relieved. Sometimes other issues that somebody has one can offer assistance beyond just hoping and praying to whatever higher being one has to offer help. So it's good to feel like one can be useful in a non-intervening way, in a way where you offer help, the help is accepted, and you dream, and you ask the rock to help. And sometimes it's one night, sometimes it's 2 nights, sometimes it's a long time. But it's a way of being, of accepting that the world is way more complex and magical and mystical than we might imagine. And our role can be one of genuine assistance if we honor that possibility.